The paternity test results, crumpled and crushing, rested in Rick Dalton's rough hands like a verdict of death. Two boys, 11 years and 8 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees, and moments of fatherly pride, were not his, not even remotely. The paper shook as Rick read the numbers again in the dim glow of his repair truck. Child A, 0% probability of paternity. Child B, 0% probability of paternity. The sterile wording stabbed into his chest like shards of ice. He'd suspected something for months. Cara's late-night calls, her sudden taste for designer clothes, the way she recoiled from his touch. But this was annihilation, wrapped in the cold authority of a laboratory letterhead. Rick folded the papers and jammed them into his toolbox, beside the heavy-duty wrenches that had built his modest refrigeration business from nothing. 15 years of marriage, 13 years believing he was a father, all of it constructed on lies so thick they choked him. His phone buzzed, a text from Dean Marrow, his so-called business partner, his friend. "Hey buddy, that wine fridge is acting up again. Mind swinging by tonight? Cara mentioned you're free?" Rick stared at the message. Dean's house, where Cara spent her Tuesday evenings for book club, where she claimed to discuss literature with the neighborhood wives. The same Dean who'd helped Rick grow his business, who supplied wholesale parts at friendship prices. Rick typed back, "On my way." The drive to Dean's McMansion took 12 minutes through streets lined with perfect lawns and perfect deceptions. Rick's battered service truck looked like a blemish next to Dean's spotless BMW and Mercedes. Dean answered the door in a silk robe, his hair still damp from a shower. "Rick, thanks for coming out so late, man. The wine fridge just died completely. You know how it is. Got some expensive bottles in there." "No problem." Rick hefted his toolbox. "Lead the way." The house reeked of expensive cologne and the lingering scent of something intimate. Rick followed Dean through marble hallways lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Rick earned in a year. They descended into a basement that resembled a gentleman's club. Leather furniture, crystal decanters, and the problematic wine fridge humming angrily in the corner. "Started making weird noises yesterday," Dean explained, settling into a leather chair with a glass of scotch. "Then just died this morning." Rick knelt beside the unit, his hands tracing familiar components. Loose compressor belt, simple 15-minute fix. He opened his toolbox and began working, his muscle memory taking over while his mind churned through darker calculations. "How's Cara doing?" Dean asked casually. "She seemed stressed last time she was here." Rick's wrench slipped, nearly scraping his knuckles. "When was that?" "Tuesday night. Book club. You know, between you and me, I think the ladies spend more time drinking wine than reading books." Dean chuckled. "Not that I'm complaining. Cara's great company." The compressor belt snapped back into place with a satisfying click. Rick stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Mind if I use your bathroom? Long day?" "Sure thing. Upstairs, master bedroom. Only one with decent water pressure." Rick climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a march toward his own execution. The master bedroom was a shrine to excess. A California king bed with black silk sheets, a walk-in closet larger than Rick's garage, and a bathroom that belonged in a five-star hotel. He splashed cold water on his face, staring at his reflection in the gold-framed mirror. 41 years old, gray creeping into his brown hair, hands permanently stained with grease and honest labor. What had he expected? That a woman like Cara would stay satisfied with a man like him forever? Rick reached for a towel and froze. Tucked behind a stack of luxury bath products was a Polaroid. His heart stopped. Cara, his wife, naked except for black lingerie he'd never seen, posed provocatively on the marble vanity where he now stood. Her wedding ring glinted on her finger as she touched herself, her eyes locked on the camera, with an expression of raw lust Rick hadn't seen in years. The photo trembled in his hands, written on the bottom, in Cara's handwriting. "For my real man." Rick pocketed the photo and walked downstairs on legs that felt like concrete. Dean was refilling his scotch, utterly at ease. All fixed, Rick said, his voice distant, strange. Compressor belt came loose. Should run fine now. You're a lifesaver, buddy. Dean pulled out his wallet. What do I owe you? Nothing. Friends help friends, right? Dean grinned and extended his hand. Rick shook it, noting how soft Dean's palm felt compared to his own scarred knuckles. The hands of a rich man. Hands that had never built anything, never fixed anything, never earned anything through sweat. Cara's lucky to have a guy like you, Dean said. Reliable, dependable, salt of the earth. Yeah, Rick replied. I know exactly what I am. The drive home felt surreal, as if Rick were floating through a nightmare. His house looked smaller than ever, the modest two-story colonial dwarfed by the memory of Dean's mansion. Cara's car wasn't in the driveway, probably still at book club, or maybe Dean's bed. Rick sat in his truck for 20 minutes, staring at the home where he'd believed he was building a family. The Polaroid burned against his chest, tucked inside his work shirt, pressed against his heart. His phone rang. Cara's voice, bright and casual. Hey, honey. Book club's running late tonight. Don't wait up. Okay. Love you. Love you too. The words tasted like shattered glass. Rick said them automatically, his mind already elsewhere. The boys were asleep when he finally went inside. He stood in the doorway of their shared bedroom, watching Tommy and Jake breathe peacefully beneath superhero blankets, 11 and 8 years old. DNA that traced back to Dean Marrow, not Rick Dalton. But they didn't know that. To them, he was Dad. They hugged him when he came home from work, asked him to fix their bikes, to help with homework. That love was real, even if the biology wasn't. Rick pulled out the paternity test results one last time, reading them before feeding the papers into the kitchen shredder. The machine devoured the laboratory proof of his humiliation with mechanical efficiency. But the Polaroid stayed. Evidence for later. Cara came home at 2:17 a.m., slipping into bed like a ghost. She smelled of expensive soap and unfamiliar cologne. Rick pretended to sleep, listening as her breathing settled into the rhythm of someone with a clear conscience. Morning arrived with its usual chaos. Breakfast, backpacks, the boys bickering over cereal bowls while Cara rushed around in her real estate office clothes. She kissed Rick goodbye, with lips that had been wrapped around another man just hours earlier. Have a good day, honey. Love you. Love you too. After everyone left, Rick sat at the kitchen table and began to plan. Revenge wasn't a dish best served cold. It was a machine, built carefully, with precision and patience. One wrong move, and the whole thing would explode in his face. First, he needed more evidence. The Polaroid was devastating, but not enough. Rick spent the morning installing a voice-activated recording app on Cara's laptop, hidden deep in the system files where she'd never find it. Then he cloned her phone, redirecting copies of every text and call to a burner device bought with cash. By afternoon, he had a complete picture of his wife's betrayal. Text messages spanning 8 months, explicit photos, voice recordings of intimate phone sessions while Rick worked late in the garage. Even financial records showing Cara had been siphoning money from their joint account to Dean's business. But the worst discovery was buried in a folder labeled Future Plans, legal documents, divorce papers already drafted, custody agreements giving Cara primary custody of the boys, while Rick paid maximum child support for children who weren't his. She'd planned everything. The affair wasn't passion, it was strategy. Rick printed every document, every photo, every text. He organized the evidence in manila folders like a case file, because that's exactly what he was building. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Rick's life. Pretending everything was normal while documenting every lie, every betrayal, every casual cruelty. Cara grew bolder, staying out later, making less effort to hide her contempt for Rick and their boring life together. Maybe you should think about expanding the business, she suggested over dinner one night. Dean says there's a lot of opportunity in commercial refrigeration. Big money. Dean says a lot of things, Rick replied carefully. He's trying to help you, Rick. God knows you need it. We can't live like this forever. The boys glanced between their parents, sensing a tension they couldn't understand. Tommy, the older one, reached over and patted Rick's hand. Dad, are you okay? Rick forced a smile. Just tired, buddy. Work stuff. That night, Rick listened to Cara's phone call with Dean through his hidden recordings. He's so pathetic. Cara's voice crackled through the earpiece. Just sits there like a kicked dog. I almost feel sorry for him. Not much longer, Dean replied. Once the divorce goes through, you'll be free. We both will. What about the boys? What about them? Rick will pay child support, and they'll have a real father figure in their lives. Win-win. Rick turned off the recording and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. The end of the month brought Rick's opportunity. Dean's warehouse had just received a massive shipment of commercial refrigeration units, a contract worth nearly $500,000. The delivery was scheduled for a Friday night, when most businesses were closed. Rick had studied the warehouse's security system for weeks. Dean, arrogant as ever, had only basic cameras and motion sensors, easily bypassed by someone with Rick's technical skills. Friday night, Rick parked 6 blocks away and walked to the warehouse, a gym bag full of tools slung over his shoulder. He cut through the fence behind the loading dock and disabled the alarm system using tricks picked up from 15 years of emergency service calls. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of stacked appliances and parts. Rick moved through the darkness like a shadow, planting small devices throughout the building. Not explosives. Nothing that would hurt anyone. Something far more precise. Refrigerant gas, specifically ammonia-based coolant, would slowly leak from punctured lines over the weekend. By Monday morning, the entire warehouse would resemble a chemical disaster zone. The health department would shut it down immediately, and Dean's $500,000 contract would vanish, along with his business reputation. Rick also placed several small packets of marijuana in strategic spots. Nothing major, just enough to trigger possession charges when the police inevitably searched the contaminated building. But the masterpiece was Dean's office computer. Rick installed a virus that would corrupt the hard drive while simultaneously uploading Dean's financial records to an anonymous tip line for tax fraud investigations. By 3 a.m., Rick was back home in bed, listening to Cara's gentle snoring. She had no idea her world was about to collapse. Saturday morning, the first domino fell. Rick's phone rang at 8 a.m. Rick, thank God it's Dean. I need your help, man. Something's wrong at the warehouse. Smells like a chemical leak. You know anything about refrigerant systems? Rick rubbed his eyes, feigning grogginess. Chemical leak? That sounds dangerous, Dean. You should call the fire department. I can't afford to have this place shut down. I've got a massive delivery Monday morning. Can you just take a look, please? Sorry, buddy. That's beyond my skill level. You need hazmat specialists for chemical leaks. Rick hung up and smiled at his coffee cup. By Monday, local news was running stories about the mysterious contamination at Marrow Appliance Distribution. Dean's contracts were canceled. His insurance company launched an investigation. The IRS received an anonymous tip about unreported income. But Rick was just getting started. Tuesday brought phase 2. Cara's car, a leased BMW she could barely afford, suffered a mysterious mechanical failure in the parking lot of her real estate office. The refrigeration unit in the trunk, installed to keep champagne cold for client celebrations, exploded during a staff meeting. No one was hurt, but the chaos destroyed Cara's presentation to a major client. Worse, the investigation revealed the unit had been tampered with. Insurance fraud investigators began asking uncomfortable questions about Cara's recent financial activities. Rick watched the news coverage from his garage, surrounded by the tools of his trade. Every wrench, every gauge, Every component had become a weapon in his war against betrayal. Wednesday, Dean called again. Rick, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be straight with me. Have you been to my warehouse recently? Your warehouse? Why would I go there? Someone sabotaged my inventory. Professional job? The kind that takes serious technical knowledge. Rick paused, letting the silence stretch. You think I sabotaged your business? I don't know what to think anymore. Everything's falling apart. The tax guys are crawling up my ass. Insurance won't pay for the contamination. And now Cara's having car trouble, too. It's like someone's got it out for both of us. Maybe you should examine your recent choices, Rick said quietly. Sometimes consequences take a while to catch up. The line went dead. Thursday evening, Rick received an unexpected visitor. Cara's sister, Michelle, knocked on his door, her expression a mix of discomfort and anger. We need to talk, she said, pushing past Rick into the house. They sat in the living room, where Rick had once believed he was part of a happy family. Michelle clutched a manila envelope like a weapon. Cara asked me to give you these, she said, sliding divorce papers across the coffee table. She's staying at a hotel until you move out. Rick glanced at the papers without touching them. Just like that? Rick, we all know this marriage has been over for years. Cara deserves to be happy. The boys deserve stability. Stability? Rick's laugh was sharp, like breaking machinery. That's interesting coming from Cara. Michelle's face flushed. Look, I know you're hurt, but dragging this out won't help anyone. Sign the papers, split the assets, work out custody. Be adults about this. Rick stood and walked to his filing cabinet. He pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table next to the divorce papers. Before I sign anything, Rick said, I think you should see what kind of woman your sister really is. Michelle opened the folder. Her face went white. Photographs, text messages, financial records, 8 months of documented adultery and fraud, organized with mechanical precision. Oh my God, Michelle whispered, staring at the Polaroid from Dean's bathroom. Rick, I had no idea. Neither did I. Until recently. Michelle flipped through page after page of evidence, her hands shaking. The boys, they're not mine, biologically speaking, but I've been their father in every way that matters for over a decade. This is insane. Cara can't, she wouldn't. Rick pulled out his phone and played a recorded conversation. Cara's voice filled the room. Rick's such a pathetic loser. When this is over, I'll have his house, his money, and his kids, and he'll be living in some studio apartment, paying me alimony for the rest of his miserable life. Dean's voice, shocked. You said you loved me. I love what you can give me, Cara replied coldly, just like I used Rick for what he could give me. It's called being smart. Rick pulled out a final folder, the thickest one yet. Speaking of being smart, let me show you how smart I've been. The folder contained legal documents Rick had prepared with a divorce attorney specializing in paternity fraud cases, financial records proving Cara's theft, evidence of Dean's tax evasion, and documentation of their plan to fraudulently claim child support. You see, the thing about revenge, Rick explained, is that it's not about violence, it's about consequences. Natural, legal, devastating consequences. He handed copies of the documents to both Cara and Dean. Cara, you're going to be charged with paternity fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Dean, you're looking at tax evasion, business fraud, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. Cara's hand shook as she read the papers. You can't do this. I can, and I am. Those children deserve better than a lying, manipulative mother. Dean struggled to his feet, still clutching his broken nose. Rick, let's make a deal. I can pay you money, whatever you want. What I want, Rick said, is for both of you to understand what it feels like to lose everything you thought was yours. He pressed a button on a remote control. The screens throughout the factory began broadcasting live to social media accounts Rick had created. Every ugly word Cara and Dean had spoken, every cruel confession, every moment of their moral bankruptcy was streaming to their friends, families, and professional contacts. "You're destroying us," Cara whispered. "You destroyed yourselves," Rick replied. "I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." Rick walked toward the exit, leaving Cara and Dean to face the consequences of their choices. At the doorway, he turned back. "Oh, and Dean? Your insurance company called. They're not covering the warehouse damage. Turns out your policy doesn't include coverage for criminal activity. You'll be declaring bankruptcy by Christmas." "Rick, wait!" Cara stepped forward. "Don't." Rick's voice stopped her cold. "Don't say my name. Don't contact me. Don't come to the house. Your lawyer can communicate with my lawyer. That's it." "What about the boys?" Rick paused. His carefully controlled fury cracked, revealing the pain beneath. "The boys will be fine. They'll have a father who actually loves them, not a sperm donor who sees them as meal tickets. And they'll have a mother who—" He looked at Cara with something like pity. "Actually, they'll need therapy to deal with having you as a mother." Rick left them in the abandoned factory with their shattered dreams and bleeding consciences. The live stream continued, broadcasting their humiliation to the world. 6 months later, Rick sat in family court, listening to a judge read the final custody ruling. Cara had been found guilty of paternity fraud and ordered to pay Rick restitution for 13 years of falsified child support. She'd lost her real estate license, her house, and her reputation. Dean's bankruptcy had been finalized the previous month. The IRS had seized his assets, and he was facing federal tax evasion charges. The man who'd once lived in a mansion was now renting a studio apartment and working at a chain restaurant. But the sweetest moment came at Tommy's Little League game the following spring. Rick was in the stands, cheering as his son, because Tommy was his son in every way that mattered, hit a double to left field. Cara appeared beside the bleachers, looking haggard and desperate. She'd lost 30 pounds, aged 5 years and 12 months. "Rick," she said quietly, "please, can we talk?" Rick didn't take his eyes off the field. "Nothing to talk about. The boys miss me. They ask about me. The boys are in therapy, learning to process having a mother who lied to them their entire lives. They're doing fine. I made mistakes. You made choices." Rick finally looked at her. "Actions have consequences. You taught me that." Cara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm working at a grocery store, Rick, living in a one-bedroom apartment. I lost everything." "Good." The word hit Cara like a physical blow. She stood there for a moment, realizing the man she'd manipulated and betrayed had become something she didn't recognize, something unmovable, unbreakable. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not," Rick replied. On the field, Tommy rounded second base and headed for third. Rick stood, cheering loudly for the boy who called him Dad, regardless of DNA. Cara walked away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She never approached Rick again. That evening, Rick tucked both boys into bed in the house he'd managed to keep through careful legal maneuvering. Jake hugged him tight. "Dad, are you happy now?" Rick smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in 2 years. "Yeah, buddy, I'm happy." "Good," Jake said sleepily. "You deserve to be happy." Rick turned off the lights and walked downstairs to his workshop. On the wall hung a photo of him with the boys at last month's school science fair. Below it, almost hidden behind his tool rack, was the Polaroid that had started everything. Rick pulled out the photo and stared at it one final time. Then he fed it into his paper shredder, watching Cara's smug expression disappear into the mechanical teeth that had once chewed up paternity tests. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. Rick's repair truck sat in the driveway next to a newer model he'd been able to afford after Cara's restitution payments started arriving. Rick Dalton had learned an important lesson about consequences. Sometimes they took a while to arrive, but when they did, they were worth the wait. Some mechanics fix machines, Others fixed lives. Rick had done both.